So, it's a quiet morning in a dirt cheap motel. Over the last week, I cycled over the highest point that I will cycle in the entire world, over the Rocky Mountains, and as I plummeted down at high speed all the way to Denver, Colorado, to meet new friends and fix my broken tent, I was filled with optimism that the rest of this ride was going to be okay. From here, I am 3,455 kilometers into my attempt to be the first transgender person to cycle around the world. And I'm headed on to the east coast of the United States. Alright, so I figured that this time, instead of doing a voiceover while I'm pedaling, I would try to do a voiceover while I'm packing. I did pedaling voiceovers for the last two videos, and I had this theory that they would help me save time and everything else, but that hasn't proved to be the case because it takes a long time to edit the pedaling voiceovers because I take some quite strange pauses and I take a lot of breaths, so the editing phase takes like twice as long. As much as I think that the pedaling videos might be a bit more interesting from a storytelling perspective, I'm going to try this time. From the last video, I was just leaving Wyoming and heading into Colorado. Absolutely thrilled that I was going to go back into the mountains and get a bit of a break from the headwinds and crosswinds that plagued me in Wyoming. However, in saying that, I am now in Nebraska, so I spent a week in Colorado, had a rest day in Denver, and now heading into Nebraska. I'm 2 days into a 5-day headwind, and all things considered, though I've taken my time so that I could record this, the headwind starts from about 6 o'clock in the morning and gets heavier and heavier until I'm pedaling at about 12 kilometers an hour into a strong headwind towards the end of the day and in the afternoon. And looking at the forecast, that's going to continue. There's a southerly every now and then, and the one tailwind that might be my option over the next few days is from midnight to 5 a.m. And as much as I'd love to have a tailwind, I don't think the exchange of sacrificing my sleep is going to be worth it. So here I am, pedaling into a headwind for at least 3 more days while I head on the way to Lincoln. So the last parts of Wyoming was a ride from Rollins to encampment, where I posted up at the river campsite, and on the way I stopped by the bins at Saratoga, found some bags of salad, so I was pretty stoked about that, considering that most cycle tourists are constantly dreaming of salad. I know I certainly am. And then from encampment I rolled on and over the border. At the time I was still trying to upload my last video and hadn't figured out that I was actually just compressing the file at way too big of a size, so I was jumping from Wi-Fi spot to Wi-Fi spot and only getting a little bit of progress and feeling really stuck, which is why I had an absolute blast of uploads last week, because I finally figured out that it was just the fact that my videos were coming out at way too high a quality to be worth it. So I crossed into Colorado at about midday and cycled on to Walden, where what I thought was going to be a pretty uneventful day. In some ways I was grateful for it to be an uneventful day. Turned out to be surprising friends in the evening, so I rolled up to the local park thinking, cool, this is just going to be a free campsite, I'm going to be by myself, and found Queer Plus Bikes, the queer cycling club from North Colorado. So they looked at me and thought, that looks like someone we know, but we don't know them. Who did we invite? And I looked at them going, huh, they look like me. And so I had a great time hanging out with them, and they sent me away with one of their cycling caps, which was extremely generous. And immediately I was starting to think, dang, I love Colorado. I just stumble across a queer cycling club immediately as soon as I arrive in the state. So it was quite hard to tear myself away from hanging out with the Queer Plus Bikes crew who were on their annual Queerdos and Weirdos, I think it's called, bikepacking trip. But it had to be done because I have a deadline and I have my sights set on Denver to have a rest day and sort out the next leg of my route, especially considering that I hadn't really planned the section after Denver all that well. I had a loose idea that I was going to go down the Transamerica Trail, but so far the Trans Am, which happens to be a road cycling route, was absolutely boring me to death. And people kept talking to me about Kentucky being a place that I should avoid because there are so many roaming dogs that chase cyclists on that particular route. So I was keen for a rest day to figure stuff out, and thanks to Erin from Fems and Thems, who put the word out on their Instagram, I was able to find a bunch of folks that I could stay with. So that was super awesome. So from Walden, another fairly uneventful day. Immediate reroute, because looking at the map, I found out that I was so close to the highest road in North America, which I believe is around 3,750 meters of elevation, 12,000 and something feet, but I don't use feet. It's a ridiculous measurement. So I quickly rerouted with the plan that I'd accept the temptation to go up the tallest road and perhaps even see some snow. I was running into a bit of trouble finding campsites, mainly because I'd heard that there were a lot of hiker-biker campsites that exist in America, but so far that hasn't really proven to be the case. So I spent a bit of time on Google trying to comprehend if Rocky Mountain had hiker-biker sites before giving up and going for a distributed site. Also quite useful because the distributed sites are free, and the paid campsites, if there isn't a hiker-biker site, that's going to be like $30 US a lot of the time, and that's way above my budget for the day, so I tend to go out of my way to look for free campsites most of the time. So I rolled in really late to a campsite up in the mountains above Grand Lake. Took a while to find a spot because it was so busy up there, but I eventually found one and went to pitch my tent and found that the aluminium sleeve inside my MSR carbon pole had delaminated, and because this is a tent that relies on tension all the way around, and I didn't have a special tent repair sleeve, my tent was almost unpitchable, and I ended up splinting it together with some tent stakes, but I knew that this was going to be a bit of an emergency, and unlike on short trips, if you can't get your tent up on a world cycle tour, then you're pretty much rendered homeless, you're bivvying, or you're paying too much for motels until you can sort it out. So I called up my friend Liz and asked her to see if there was any tents available that I could pick up on my way through. I'd started looking at places like REI, but they all only had two-person tents available from what I could see. Thankfully, she found me a Big Agnes Fly Creek for sale on Craigslist in Boulder. So then, as soon as I got over Rocky Mountain, had one more night of sleeping in a broken tent, and then I was able to buy a replacement on the way, and I ended up shipping out my old tent from Denver. So I cycled up Rocky Mountain National Park. On the way in, grabbing a signature at the visitor center down at the base of the mountain, and then heading up to the summit Alpine Visitor Center. It was pretty chill on the way up, and Mike, a cyclist on the Trans Am, had gifted me some instant pudding a few days before, and I saved it for the special occasion of climbing up the mountain. And then as I got to the summit, I came to realize that because it was a long weekend in the United States, Rocky Mountain was exceptionally busy, and the cars were buzzing around like bees all around the summit, with people trying to get that sought after landscape photo. So when I got to Alpine Visitor Center, the car park was absolutely wild. I squeezed through and found the park rangers just minutes before the visitor center was about to close. They gave me some signatures for my world record witness book, and were just the sweetest people at a visitor center I've met yet. Each of them, as they drove down the other side of the mountain, they called out "Go Robbie" from their trucks, and I think I'll always remember that as like such a cool, wholesome moment in my cycling trip. As far as all of the locals, well, I say locals, all of the tourists, they would kind of wave, sometimes yell out encouragement, and sometimes look a bit sheepish, like, yes, I know, I drove here, you cycled. One of the benefits of being that high up in the mountains is that the drivers were actually quite nice, probably because it's just so ridiculous to be up there as a cyclist. So I had the benefit of that, and coming down the other side of the mountain, I pretty much didn't pedal for about 40 kilometers until I got to Estes Park, which is the next town. From there, I stretched on to another free campsite called Lion Gulch, which meant a little bit more sketchy nighttime riding than I'd hoped for. I tend to forget what day it is and not to cycle on a Friday or a Saturday night, so I'm trying to get a little bit better at that. And then from Lion Gulch, it was smooth sailing all the way on to Lions, then Boulder, and then ultimately Denver. So coming down from Lions and onto Boulder seemed a bit like a fantasy world to me. There was so many pride flags and so many cyclists presumably out for their Saturday morning ride, and this just continued until the point that roadies were constantly passing me in the other direction, and of course, being roadies, not waving and looking at me a little bit confused as I waved at all of them. And then went and picked up my tent. This day, all I'd eaten was dumpster food. I dumpster dived a croissant in Lions in the morning, had some bread that I dumpster dived the night before in Estes Park, and then dumpster dived some donuts in Boulder, and had a little snack with the folks that sold me their tent as well. I rode on to Denver, found a beer at the underpass where I stopped to put on my rain jacket, so I had a free beer as well. And then ended up staying with Court, who had connected with me through Fems and Thems and really kindly offered me a place to stay that night. I had lots of offers of places to stay, so I couldn't choose. I picked the first two that got in touch, as they both sounded great. So the next day, after hanging out with Court, I went to hang out with Rowan Ellis, who also had connected with me through Thems and Thems. The rest day wasn't much of a rest day because of all of the route planning and various jobs that I had to do, figure out how to get rid of my old tent that I obviously couldn't keep carrying. It was taking up all of my extra capacity, and figuring out how to schedule and post a bunch of these videos. So, like most of the days, I tend to end up pretty much like if this was a job, I work from the minute I wake up until the minute I go to sleep. And I guess I don't really say this to complain so much as I say it because I assume that a lot of folks who want to watch a video like this want to understand what it takes to be able to do a world tour. Certainly, that's how I decided I wanted to do a world tour. I watched a lot of Rad Bike Adventure, and I watched Ed Pratt's Unicycle World Record, and all the stuff that they put out talking about what they did to organize their world circumnavigation by bike helped me both think about how I was going to do it and also just understand the logistical ramifications. And while I don't know, I can't help but bag on sponsorship a little bit, and I'm sure the grass is quite green on that side of the world. It does give me a lot of editorial freedom to not have sponsors and everything like that, but it does mean that because I am my own videographer, I'm my own photographer, I'm my bike mechanic, I'm my social media person, I'm the one planning the route and responding to the messages, figuring out if there is anyone that can host me, and trying to maintain some sort of sanity by actually socializing with people along the way and not just remaining in a kind of worky bubble. It does mean that things tend to be a little bit non-stop on this trip. When I do have a motel room like this one, as soon as I get in, it's laundry, it's food resupply, because when the bike is locked away somewhere safe, I can do a much more detailed resupply without having to run into the store in a big panic trying to grab things quickly so that my bike doesn't get stolen. It's video editing, video recording, it's all of these things that quickly need to happen because I can't do them while camping. But I also run the risk of sickness and infection if I don't stop and continually make sure things are clean. So I had an awesome time hanging out in Denver. I'm very humbled and grateful for all of the offers of places to stay, and I loved seeing the queer community. I swung by Treehouse Cyclery on the way out since everyone had been telling me that was the shop to go to, and then trekked out towards my new destination, my new reroute, which is Nebraska. I thought that I would do this pretty quickly because from here things are dead flat, but as I mentioned earlier, it does kind of just mean that I'm now just held hostage by the wind direction. I saw Lael Wilcox say a similar thing on her recent post cycling around the world about Australia, which is that some days you're flying and other days you're struggling. And so far, most of those days have been just struggling away, listening to audiobooks and limping on towards Lincoln, where my next big resupply will be. So while Denver has an exceptionally strong queer community, the next few days heading out into rural Colorado and into Nebraska has meant that I haven't really seen many cyclists at all, and I haven't really talked to anyone except occasionally visitor centres and public library staff to ask them for a world record witness. It's been pretty antisocial over the last few days, except for a train hopper that stopped me in Walmart and asked me if I was a traveller as well, which I assume means that now my clothes are looking dirty and mended enough that I fit right in with train hopper culture, which, I don't know, as someone who grew up listening to Johnny Hobo and the freight trains and things like that, kind of neat. There is not really train hopping culture in New Zealand because we have one train line that goes down the country and that's kind of it. But ultimately my hope is that by the time I make it to Lincoln, I will be joining up with some of the sections of the Great American Rail Trail, which is a proposed gravel cycling route all the way through from coast to coast. Most states seem to only have 50% completion of the route, so there'll be a lot of making it up as I go along, but at least it'll give me some alternative options to just dragging my way down the highway every single day until I get to the East Coast. And I'm going to confess that perhaps doing this voiceover while unpacking is a huge mistake, because later I'm going to go to get things out of my bike and have absolutely no idea where I've put them, but at least now this is day 36, I kind of have an idea of where everything is supposed to be. Most of the stuff in my pannier bags is stuff I don't need to get out during the day. Frame bag and the handlebar bag is for daytime stuff, and handlebar bag is also for anything that might need to be kept waterproof. Aside from replacing my tent, I haven't changed my setup that much, except for just replaced my manual toothbrush with a cheap battery-powered electric toothbrush, which is a little bit bougie and not very weight-weenie, but in America there's so much sugar in everything, so I'm started to get paranoid that all the sugar is going to ruin me. So dental care while on tour is probably a worthy sacrifice to make for a little bit of extra weight. As far as the numbers go, I've been tracking all of my numbers for each day to make sure that I'm deducting any that are me doubling back to get to a store or a campsite or whatever, and to make sure that I'm on target to make my flight at the end of next month. So at the moment I'm sitting at 3,455 kilometers, which means that with the 3 rest days that I've had, I'm basically almost caught up. I'm 45 kilometers behind, which means that for 3 rest days I've earned back those 255 kilometers to put me back up at a 100 kilometer a day average. My bear vault is starting to get a crack, which is kind of concerning, but thankfully I'm out of grizzly bear territory, so I can only hope that it doesn't completely crack through and I have to figure out another way to carry my food. That's pretty much it. The longer I wait here, the stronger the wind is going to get, so I have to leave ASAP. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's a pretty small group of folks at the moment, but thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. On my way out of Denver, I swung by to grab some more dumpster donuts, and I'll confess my standards were starting to slip a little bit, so I was pulling things that I probably would have had more pause about, but I don't know, I'd cycled 4Ks off course for donuts and post office. The post office my Garmin thought was there had been demolished, and the donuts were the only consolation prize. So I packed up a bunch of donuts, and as I was eating them later, one of them just had the biggest, longest hair stuck in it, and I just felt ill, gave up on eating the donuts, and thought, oh my gosh, I need to really cool it with the dumpster diving. But that didn't last for long, because later I ended up stopping by at a grocery store and finding an amazing haul of baby tomatoes and a whole watermelon and some peppers and apples and other things. And I've hopped back on the wagon, but I think I might be cooling it on the bakery stuff for a while, or at least in big cities in this temperature where, you know, lots of people are potentially going through the dumpster stuff, not just in rural places where it seems almost guaranteed that it's only me.